advancing gender equality. I walked into that room, and just let me say, at that time, Argentina was a very progressive gender foreign policy, not what you hear now today. And when I walked into that room, there were, as I say, 60 experts, and I was the only man in that meeting. And I will be very honest, I really felt out of place. I questioned my role, my contributions, even if I had a right to be there and speak on something that I really care, that is gender equality, because of my sex. That day, I really thought about all my female colleagues that for decades, including my first diplomatic post, an ambassador from Argentina was amazing, have found themselves in that same position, being the odd one out, in a room full of power. So, and that really stayed with me. As I said, I was a diplomat for 20 years, that only happened once. So I don't know, I always thought, okay, this is something that we have to change. The second moment that why I decided to speak is when I was inviting Ambassador Lopez to be a speaker today. So I was sending her an email in Spanish saying that the core of this event was trying to highlight, among other things, the contribution of female diplomats, in Spanish, diplomáticas, to the UN. And my Gmail kept on changing diplomáticas into diplomáticos. So even our technology in 2025 continues to assume that diplomacy is a man world, and it's men who make the contributions to doing a better world. But we know better. As the UN prepared to a new leadership transition in 2026, this conversation could not be more urgent. The multilateral system is really facing a crisis of trust and legitimacy, and we really need to bring women leadership into this organization that is behind us if we want really to change how things are done. It is essential to make diplomacy deliver for everyone, to have more women at the table. And also the timing of today's event is not coincidence. As many of you will know, tomorrow marks the start of the new General Assembly session, the 80th General Assembly session, and we will have the 5th female president of the General Assembly leading a main organ. So in 80 years of history, only 5 women had that privilege. If it's exactly the right moment to be talking about breaking barriers and shaping the future of multilateral diplomacy, and that's why we really value our partnership with LSE Ideas and Matters so much. Because LSE is bringing today a lot of cutting-edge research about how a structural barrier enables of women advancement in the diplomatic world. And from our side, from the side of CIC, we really hope to continue our goal of applied policy focus, working alongside the governments, the UN, and civil society to drive concrete reforms. So together, LSE, CIC, and this community, we hope to really bridge insights into action and to move from recommendations to real change. But so this is all that you are going to hear from a man, and I hope all the men are going to listen now. And really, it's my great pleasure to introduce 2 distinguished ambassadors that I have the pleasure and the honor to know from many years, and whose leadership really truly embodies these ideas that we hope to showcase today. First, I would like to introduce the ambassador of El Salvador, Egriselda Lopez. She is a permanent representative of El Salvador to the United Nations since July 2019. She has held prominent leadership roles within the UN General Assembly, including as chair of the 4th and 5th committees, as well as co-chair of the ad hoc working group on revitalization of the General Assembly during 3 sessions. Ambassador Lopez has really a diplomatic career that includes roles both at home and abroad, including as deputy head of mission on the Salvadorian embassy in the Republic of Korea. And in this little world of us, she has also been very active on the gender discussions, including as member of the PG Advisory Board on Gender Inequality, since it was created in 2021, and also as co-coordinator of the Circle of Women Ambassadors to the United Nations in 2021 and 2023, and founded of the Network of Women of the Salvadorian Foreign Service, which is also its first presidency in 2022 and 2023. So with this introduction, Ambassador Lopez, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much, Fernando, for the kind introduction. It's such an honor to be here. Good afternoon to all here in this full room, but also to those that are following via YouTube as well. It's really a privilege to be with you today, and my deepest appreciation also to CIC and LSE for organizing this important conversation. Let me begin with a very personal note. I chose to study international relations back in my country, El Salvador, because I grew up inspired by the role of the UN played in my country after the Civil War. So I knew firsthand the impact of the UN in our reconstruction and reconciliation. But it was only much later that I realized something striking. Throughout my studies and my early years of my career, I never once had a female role model in diplomacy. No one. So I only came to that realization while I was conducting my 2018 research on the role of women in the Salvadoran Foreign Service. So the literature was clear. The history of diplomacy was written by and about men, king, general, special envoys, and also commercial messengers. Women were only formally included in the 20th century in the foreign services. And men were assumed to hold the skills and the authority that states require. So that realization made me actually to reflect on the absence of women and women's voices in diplomacy, on the urgency of making space for women. And that absence precisely became one of my motivations for founding the National Network of Women in Diplomacy in El Salvador, REMUSADI. And with REMUSADI, we set out to ensure that young women entering our foreign service will not have to face the same absence. One of our flagship initiatives is precisely structural mentorship programs. Senior diplomats volunteer as mentors, and they are paired with junior colleagues for 3 months of guided discussions with concrete outcomes. This network is currently chaired by my dear friend, Ambassador Claudia Beltran, and we are now in our 3rd edition. Believe me that I have seen firsthand how mentorship transforms careers, but also builds confidence in women. And at the UN, we have also seen the value of networks like the Circle of Women Ambassadors, and this group of colleagues has become more than a professional forum, I have to say. It's a sisterhood. It reminds us that solidarity and sorority is not abstract. It's lived in daily acts of support, but also encouragement and shared leadership. These networks matter because leadership positions in multilateral diplomacy, unfortunately, remain uneven. I could share with you a lot of data, many numbers that could reflect this disparity. But now that we are here in front of the UN, let me focus on some of the UN figures that maybe some of you may know. So according to the Women in Multilateralism 2025 report by GWL Voices, imagine, since 1947, more than 2,800 people have been served as permanent representatives to the UN. But just 7% out of those have been women. And 73 countries have never appointed a women permanent representative. And as 2024, only 21% of women are currently permanent representatives. Our dear friend Fernando mentions also that tomorrow, finally, we're gonna have the 5th female president of the General Assembly taking office. And as you know, in 80 years of the organization, we never had a women Secretary General. So, if diplomacy is meant to reflect the world it represents, this imbalance, let me be clear, is unacceptable. That's why this conversation is so urgent. It's so important. What hinders women from taking leadership roles in diplomacy? And more importantly, what can we do to change it? So I'm so looking forward for this discussion. To LSE Ideas report definitely shows up these obstacles, these barriers. And let me add some, maybe, to this. Let's add, besides the glass ceilings, the glass walls, and the glass cliff, sometimes the absence of child support, rigid career structures, the constant struggle for work-life balance, the stereotypes about women's availability. These are not personal flaws. They are systematic barriers, further compounded by the career interruption faced by women sometimes that they decide to have children and extend for sometimes their leave beyond legally established period. But I believe there's another barrier we don't often name, and that's the imposter syndrome. Many women, even after breaking barriers, doubt that they belong at the table. And this is not individual weakness. It's the result of decades of exclusion and the continued existence of barriers, gender stereotypes, and also these negative social norms. So there's another question. What kind of leadership we exercise once we arrive? Leadership is not only about getting the position, it's about how we use it. And I have seen women reach the highest position, yet surrounding themselves only with men to feel secure in their opinions, overlooking the voices of other women. And this is too part of the challenge. But there are some rays of hope. So last Friday, the GA adopted its most recent resolution about the revitalization. That is basically a fancy name about the reform of the GA. So, Fernando, you mentioned about words. Words matter. And the reason why I'm bringing this is that for the first time in history, the rules of procedure of the most universal body of the UN will finally include women through amending the male-dominated language with inclusion of feminine pronouns in all 6 official languages. So instead of said chairman, it will be only chair, or in Spanish, presidenta. And words matter. They shape culture, and they make us women visible. The resolution, just to mention a few things, also calls for more women leadership in the GA bodies, urges action to correct this imbalance in the GA presidency, as the one that you were mentioned, and reaffirms that gender parity must guide recruitment across UN system. This is a step forward, definitely, but it's not enough. Now it's time to ensure that these provisions will be actually translated into action. And another milestone looms on the horizon, the selection of the next Secretary General. So for decades, us women have been told, not this time. So if we're serious about parity, if we truly believe in inclusive leadership, then 2026 selection must be the moment we say it is time for a woman to lead this organization. This is a hot discussion at the UN right now. When we raise the issue of Madam Secretary General, we often receive the response, but she must be qualified. As if to remind us that women always have to prove that we're worthy, while men are assumed to be. So this links directly to the UN's current credibility crisis, something that also Fernando mentioned. Multilateralism is under strain. Trust in institutions is eroding, and the gap between people and politics is widening. So I believe that in such moments, inclusive leadership is not symbolic, it is essential. It is the condition for stronger diplomacy, better governance, and definitely lasting peace. That is why I believe that the selection and appointment of a women Secretary General, Madame SG, in 2026 is not only desirable, it's not an issue of justice, but also is very urgent. So, dear friends, colleagues, my daughter is 7 years old. So I hope that my daughter's generation should inherit a world where women ambassadors, women presidents of the GA, and a woman secretary general, but also women leading diplomacy at every level, are not rare achievements, but everyday reality. And let me be clear, this is not a competition between men and women. This is about working together, side by side, to make diplomacy stronger, more inclusive, and more effective. It's not to exclude men either. It's not that intention. Because when women and men lead together, the world definitely is better governed, peace is more sustainable, and all our institutions are more legitimate. So tonight, I believe that this panel, this conversation, all of you here, but also those from far away, we're not only breaking barriers, I firmly believe that we're shaping the future of diplomacy, and a future that must belong to all of us and be led by all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador, for those very inspiring words. Now I have really the pleasure to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Lise Gregoire van Haaren, Permanent Representative of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to the United Nations. Ambassador van Haaren has held several senior leadership positions within the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, most recent serving as European Director and Deputy Director General for European Cooperation. From 2016 to 2019, she was the Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of the Netherlands to the United Nations, including during the country membership on the Security Council in 2018. Her distinguished career includes posts in Brussels and Paris, roles in The Hague, including as head of the Political Affairs Department and European Correspondent in 2013 and 2016. So we are really glad to have her here with us today to deliver his welcoming and opening remarks. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you, Egriselda. It's always after speaking after two gender champions, it's always a little bit sobering, and so I have to live up to that. So I would like to start by thanking the permanent representative of El Salvador, as well as our partners at the NYU CIC and LSA Ideas for convening this important discussion. So we're very happy with that. And the title of today's discussion, Breaking Barriers, Shaping Futures, captures both the continued challenges we face and the imperative, the progress we must achieve together. When Egriselda just mentioned that she never had a female role model, I realized that I didn't have a female role model when I entered the ministry. When I entered the ministry, I realized there were no women with, there were hardly any women that had a partner. So when I joined the ministry, I thought, okay, either will I be living my life alone as a diplomat, because apparently nobody would want to follow me, or I will have to go somewhere and find really hard, in difficult places, because I didn't have so many. And I didn't have role models that were like me. I saw many nasty women, if there were women at all. And I must say that I've become more mild over the years, because they must have had a real struggle paving the way for people like me. And still, I hope to be paving the way for people after me. But when I started, I thought, it was a matter of time, and I realized it's not. Not having had female role models made me choose my own path. And that means that you have to learn hard lessons, because you have to find everything out by yourself. And when not so long ago, a few years back, I was interviewed by a panel for a job interview. And they asked me to describe my leadership style. I said, my leadership style is female leadership, because that was actually what I've been searching for all these years. Like, how do I lead in a way that I'm not nasty or try to be masculine or something that I'm not? And then they said, so what does that mean? So I tried to describe what that meant for me, because that was something that I discovered by learning by doing. And then all the men in the panel felt insulted because they said, "Oh, but we do that too." I didn't get the job. So I banished the female leadership from my vocabulary. At the same time, I am happy that there are more women leaders today, and I brought some very talented young colleagues from the mission, and I hope that they will look around and see more female leaders that I had. Anyway, so all of those here today are likely to all of the same mind regarding the importance of women's representation in diplomacy. So I don't think we have to spend a lot of time reflecting why it is important, because the answer is very simple, and Egriselda already said some of the elements, and because diplomacy without women is diplomacy that is less effective, less legitimate and less just. If women are not at the table, they are often forgotten, but evidence shows that peace agreements are more durable when women are involved in negotiations. Multilateral diplomacy is more legitimate when it reflects the diversity of the societies it serves. But beyond its effectiveness, there's a matter of principle too. Gender equality is a human right. Representation is not a favor to women. It is a matter of justice, of fairness, and of democracy. In multilateral diplomacy, where legitimacy derives from inclusivity, we cannot afford to exclude half of the world's population. And this is why, and I say to Egriselda, as 2027 approaches, we very much hope that the next Secretary General will be a woman, because after 80 years, it is 2025. Say more. It is sobering that despite decades of progress, women remain underrepresented in diplomacy and in international leadership positions. And I think looking at the UN today, I think of 193 countries, we're about 40-ish women PRs. And it's not because of a lack of qualified, talented women. Those we have in abundance. Someone said, and I thought it was a Secretary General, but I couldn't pin him down on it, and he said, we will have gender equality when we also have mediocre women leaders. And I think you have to let that sink in for a bit, because I only know excellent women leaders, because you only get there when you are excellent. Instead, it is due to barriers, both visible and invisible, that continue to hold women back. So how do we address them? How do we build on the progress we have made and accelerate that in a time when women's rights are increasingly under pressure? First, we need to address recruitment and promotion. We must adopt transparent, gender-sensitive hiring practices, ensure that women are represented at every stage in the pipeline, not just at entry level, but also in senior positions. Second, we need to strengthen mentorship and sponsorship. Every woman diplomat should have access to senior figures who actively open doors, advocate on their behalf, and help her navigate institutional challenges. I myself, for example, are a mentor of a young diplomat in The Hague, and I try to share the lessons that took me many, many years to learn so that she can have a head start. And third, we must provide institutional support for work-life balance. And not just childcare. It is to create a level playing field between the sexes. This includes flexible postings, parental leave policies that are equal for men and women, and mechanisms that allow diplomats with families to thrive without having to choose between career and caregiving. And hopefully the institutional framework enables people to break traditional patterns. And that's needed to create equal chances and choices. Because still, like I started out with, a woman in my system in the Netherlands is more likely to follow her husband abroad than the other way around. Fourth, we must continue to challenge stereotypes and bias. Training and awareness are important, indeed, but what is most needed is leadership that models inclusion, calls out discrimination, and sets the tone from the top. We need examples. And finally, we should commit to accountability. Targets and indicators do matter. They help us measure progress, identify gaps, and remind us that gender equality is not a rhetorical aspiration, it is a concrete obligation. So So let me share a small example of the experience in the Netherlands and how we have tried to address some of these issues in my ministry. Regarding recruitment to senior management positions, we have taken steps to address the disparity in the advancement of men and women within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have prioritized mixed selection committees, independent pre-selection, and support for flexible working arrangements. While this has been showing positive results, we still have a long way to go in order to reach parity between men and women across all levels of leadership. And still in my ministry, we have positions that have never been fulfilled by a woman, because having parity in the number of positions doesn't say anything about the value that is attached to the position. The key to change is pursuing it with intentionality and persistence, and based on a clear understanding of the barriers that women face. And as we engage in today's discussion, I hope that we can draw lessons from each other, identify concrete steps forward, and above all, reaffirm our collective commitment to shaping a future in which women's leadership in multilateral diplomacy is not the exception, but the rule. And with that, I will close by reiterating my remarks to our partners and wishing you all a very good discussion. And I think the most important thing is to learn from each other, because we all have not found the key to complete success yet. So looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now let me introduce the moderator for tonight. This is my colleague, Natalie Briggs. She's a program officer at NYU CIC, worked at the intersection of women, peace and security on the agenda and disarmament, and she managed the Gender Equality Network for Small Arms Control, GENSAC, a global network advancing gender-responsive small arms control and advocating for increased women participation in disarmament. Natalie has previously worked as the disarmament expert at the mission of Norway to the UN, where she advised on these issues and non-proliferation during Norway's Security Council term. She has also worked at the United Nations Institute for Disarmament Research and the Manhattan DA office. Thank you, Natalie, for moderating this discussion tonight.
Great. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Fernando, and thank you to Ambassador Lopez and Ambassador Van Haaren for your inspiring opening remarks. Good evening, everyone. My name is Natalie Briggs, and it's my great honor to moderate tonight's panel discussion on breaking barriers, shaping futures, women's leadership in multilateral diplomacy. We know and have heard that women have been central to diplomacy, but the numbers still tell a sobering story. In diplomatic forums, women are still outnumbered by men 2-1. That imbalance not only reflects the barriers women face in entering and advancing in this field, but also the untapped potential of more inclusive multilateralism. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing from practitioners and scholars who can share both lived experience and research-based insights on the barriers and the solutions that shape women's participation in diplomacy. We'll begin with our practitioners, women currently navigating diplomatic spaces every day. Then we'll turn to our academic experts who have been studying these dynamics across institutions. Our goal tonight is to surface both the human stories and the recommendations for moving forward. Let me first introduce our distinguished panelists from the diplomatic community. Ms. Blanca Montejo, Deputy Chef de Cabinet from the Office of the 79th President of the UN General Assembly. Ms. Benedicta Kristanti, Political Coordinator at the Permanent Mission of Indonesia to the United Nations. And Ms. Sylvia Paola Mendoza Elguea, First Secretary from the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the United Nations. Thank you all for being with us. For this first round, I'd like to ask each of you to reflect on barriers. What are the key obstacles you see hindering women's representation in diplomacy? You can speak from personal experience or from what you've observed around you. And we'd like to start with Ms. Blanca Montejo. Ms. Montejo, as I mentioned, is the Deputy Chef de Cabinet for this year's PGA, and she was previously with the Security Council Affairs Division in the UN Secretariat. And in that role, she supported and provided advice on all aspects of the functioning of the Security Council. And she was also the gender focal point for the division, spearheading the mainstreaming of gender in all aspects of the work of the Council, and worked with the UN Women in preparation of the SG's report on Resolution 1325. Blanca, may I invite you to begin? And for the panelists, could you please take the tape recorder looking thing and speak directly into it, as that is the microphone.
Thank you. Should I, or is it enough?
Close.
Like this?
Yeah.
Close, okay. This is very cool. So I don't think I'm saying anything new to any of you, to our distinguished audience. Thank you, first of all, very much to NYU CIC for inviting me. It's an honor to be here in the presence of two distinguished ambassadors. And thank you, Fernando, for the invitation. So in terms of barriers, I don't think I'm saying anything new. Diplomacy is characterized by power, visibility, networks, all elements that are male-dominated. So it is no surprise to hear the testimonies from both ambassadors and the testimonies, I'm sure, from many from my co-panelists. It is difficult to penetrate those networks, those established networks. And so greater power and visibility, greater personal sacrifices with less support, as the ambassador from the Netherlands very clearly indicated, and heavily male-dominated environments. One of the aspects that I noticed from my personal experience in terms of barriers as Deputy Chef de Cabinet this year was the appointment of co-facilitators to the intergovernmental processes. This was an area where we focused in a very targeted manner, and we were unfortunately not successful. And I will highlight this aspect because of male and female attitudes to this. While men ambassadors would be coming forward very clearly, indicating why their qualifications and experience met the objectives of that intergovernmental process, women would be less forthcoming, less outspoken about it, less timid, if I may say. And that connects well with Ambassador Lopez's comment about the imposter syndrome, or the sense of I can't do this, or I should be doing it at this level, which tends to be also sometimes women's approach to this. And then one other aspect that I would highlight from women in diplomacy is that the incentives to change are very reduced, because they are driven heavily by biases. I mean, the fact that, as Ambassador Lopez said, that in 2025 we have to discuss whether women are qualified when they are the majority of the students in colleges and universities worldwide is shameful and very difficult to explain, but for biases, a power culture, power dynamics, close networks, and certain attitudes. I may say, to add to that, I don't think that we are in a better place than we were when 1325, for example, was adopted in the year 2000. I think that if anything is happening right now is because of the success of women, there is a clear backlash, geopolitical backlash against gender equality, and it's one that we have to be very conscious about, and I would agree with the Ambassador of the Netherlands concerning the need to be very targeted, very intentional about the necessity to look at gender equality as a visualization of progress. Wherever women are progressing, you see an enormous amount of pushback. And so I think that women in diplomacy is the perfect example where we should be developing concerted efforts, and we will get to that when the panel evolves, to ensure that geopolitically we move to a different place. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and insights with us, and especially highlighting again this imposter syndrome. I know I have felt that. I'm sure many people in this room have felt that as well. All right, next we'll turn to Ms. Benedicta Kristanti, the political coordinator for the Permanent Mission of Indonesia. She has worked on UN reform, disarmament, international security, peace building, peacekeeping, and human rights, wide portfolio, and has also served as the coordinator for the Non-Aligned Movement Working Group on Disarmament and as Indonesia's lead negotiator for the Pact for the Future. She has over 15 years of experience with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and we're very pleased to have her with us tonight. Benedicta, the floor is yours, and please speak very closely into the microphone.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to thank the CIC NYU and also the LSE, and also thank you very much, Fernando, for inviting me to this very interesting discussion that we have today. And I'm very also honored to be here alongside the great ambassadors and also great colleagues, everyone here. So I think when we talk about barriers, I cannot agree more that one thing that we need to address first is the perception. I think Fernando rightly mentioned earlier that there's a perception that diplomacy is a man's work. And we know, like for instance, as Ambassador Egri also mentioned, that there are some of the other words that used in the UN that actually a masculine word. But also sometimes, based on my personal experience, that there are very small things. Perhaps we sometimes don't really realize it. That for instance, when I was in the first committee, for instance, when everyone says, when the speakers list rolling, people would expect that the coordinator for NAM, Working Group on Disarmament, is a man. So, without really knowing who will be talking, the chair would say, "The floor is yours, mister." So, I need to rectify that at the time. And I said, "Apologies, it's a madam." So that's one of the example how our perception can actually, we need to say it out loud that we're here. We as a women, we are here in diplomacy. This is our voice. So that's one of the very small example, but sometimes it's overlooked. And sometimes also, we didn't even bother to rectify. We will just go reading our statement and everything. We should stop that. We should say, no, this is not correct. Let's rectify it. But this is my experience. But speaking on the experience of us as Indonesia also, there are some perception also that in the foreign ministry, the diplomacy is all women, all men's work, because we only have our first foreign minister, women foreign minister, just 10 years ago, Ibu Retno. But that's not as a result of an instant process. It's a result of our reform process, but also when we had our first female foreign minister, she's been able for 10 years breaking the glass ceilings. She introduced gender-sensitive policies in the country, including for us. We have for the first time our first female director for international security and disarmament. For like, I don't know, 60 years of our country. So we need to change the perception. And therefore in the foreign ministry now, I can also share that now we start to listen to the voice of female diplomats. Female diplomats really matters nowadays in our foreign ministry. And we even have a cap, like for every year, that there should be a percentage. There should be 50-50 at least, minimum, very minimum. But now, this year, we have 52 compared with 48% of men in the whole foreign ministry. Of course, it's not something that we take for granted. We still haven't had the first permanent representative here, female permanent representative here, and we're still trying on how we could have that. But I think we can still have a discussion later. But speaking of the barrier, I think one of the important thing that we need to really address is how we need to change the perspective. How to change the perspective? We should start from small. But secondly, we need to invest. We also need to invest systematically. Systematically in the sense that we need to invest to ourselves at the national level and also at the social level through the education. So I think I will stop here first, and I will look forward to the further discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Benedicta, especially for highlighting the importance of changing these perceptions. And I think key to this is the visible role models that you mentioned, especially your first female foreign minister, first director of international security and disarmament, which, as we know, is often a very militarized, male-dominated field. So next, and thank you. And next we'll have the last of our panelists from the diplomatic community, Ms. Sylvia Paola Mendoza Elguea. Sylvia is a Mexican career diplomat, currently posted at the Permanent Mission of Mexico to the United Nations here in New York. She oversees sustainable development issues, human rights, and humanitarian affairs. She's also worked with the Human Rights and Democracy Office in the ministry, where she collaborated in preparing the first Universal Periodic Review for Mexico, presented in the Human Rights Council. Sylvia, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope you all can hear me well. My voice is definitely not loud, so I'm hoping that you can hear me. So after everybody that spoke, before me, it's hard to say something new, but I do want to refer to different areas based on my own experience. First, and as I thank the organizers and Fernando for inviting me, it's the imposter syndrome. So when I was invited, I was like, "Are you inviting me? Are you sure?" So that's the first one. The next is perception, biases, and how the diplomatic world has been shaped as not for women. And I would like to share an experience that I had when I first came into the Foreign Service. So this is 15 years ago, and hopefully this question is actually banned in the entrance examination today. So I am glad. But the question that was asked of me in the interview when I first came into the Foreign Service was, do you have a partner, and do you think you will get a partner if you go into the Foreign Service? So I did have a partner at the time, and it was the same partner that I have today. And but it's a question that they wouldn't ask the men in entering the Foreign Service. And when I told my partner that, he said that was a very retrograde question. And of course, my partner today is the one that actually helps me, not helps me, but shares the childcare. And he is the one who had to give up his own career for being here with me and with our child and taking care of our child. So so that is one of the things that we do together. We share the parenting, but he does more of the parenting, and that is also kind of weird. As a woman, when the man just takes care of the baby and takes care of the little boy, and who is now 10 years old. So it's for me at first it was kind of strange, and I didn't really enjoy it. Why are you doing bath time? It's my turn to do bath time, So those kinds of things is also part of being a professional woman and dealing with that kind of not normal, if you will, change or roles in the family. So that is the perception biases issue that I wanted to get into. And also what Benedicta mentioned, the things that you don't even notice that happen. You have the floor, Mr. Whatever. I do correct them, and it does happen more than once. But at this point, I don't even remember when it happened, but I know that it's happened more than once. And so, we urge each other to correct whoever makes that mistake, please correct them. It's fun as well. So in terms of the care, I have already mentioned that that is a barrier. That is a barrier for most women, that most men are not necessarily willing to give up their careers for their partner, because they may think that they may not be able to get back into it after a period of time. So in the Mexican Foreign Service law, we have a disposition that says that we are supposed to get paid for childcare, but it's not, it doesn't apply. So it's since 2008. So in 2018. So when my kid was about 3 years old, which means I would have gotten care, and maybe my husband would have been able to go to work here in New York. So it's not an applicable law. So when we ask, hey, what's happening? The response is usually the Ministry of Finance hasn't approved the funds. So in that is an extra barrier, right? So the care for the child, and I will get into the the propositions on how to, or examples on how to make things better in the next intervention or in the conversation, because this is about barriers, but I wanted to talk about that barrier in particular. And the other is sorority and competition. Competition may be a bad word, but I just looked it up. I didn't look it up. I saw it online. As you are looking at, as I am looking at my running coach and her Instagram, and she put a post of the Latin word for competition. So comp means together, but petre means to rise up. So we are not necessarily competing against each other as women or as men, or women and men competing against each other, but we are rising together. So that I thought is a great definition of the word competition. So, and in sports, but also at work, because that is also one of the barriers that I feel that we have as women. We generally feel like we're competing with each other, or we're competing with men, so we have to be even better. So, the permanent representative Salvador mentioned how, we want a woman SG, but she has to be really qualified. Well, the men do too, right? Everybody has to be qualified. And don't tell me there's no qualified women after 80 years. I don't believe you. So in that sense, the competition and the sorority and the rising up together is something that I would like to end my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. It's great to hear these stories of sorority, as you mentioned, and encouraging examples of progress, like no longer asking that question in interviews, but it's clear that challenges still persist. So thank you so much to the three of you for grounding us in real life experiences and practical recommendations. I think now we'll turn to our academic experts who bring the perspective of research and policy analysis. So we have Dr. Haaren Smith, Professor of International Relations from the London School of Economics and Political Science, and Ms. Marta Kozielska, co-founder and manager of the Women in Diplomacy project, also from the London School of Economics. Their work systematically looks at the barriers and enablers of women's representation across foreign ministries and multilateral institutions. And their recent report, Strengthening the Representation of Women in Diplomacy, Challenges and Policy Solutions, highlights both the barriers women face and the concrete recommendations for structural change at the individual, community, and institutional levels to make diplomacy more inclusive. So first, let's hear from Dr. Haaren Smith, the co-founder and director of the Women in Diplomacy project. She has recently published extensively on feminist foreign policy, the role of women in diplomacy and foreign policy making, the European Union's diplomacy at the UN, and the role of groups in multilateralism. Haaren, please go ahead.
Thanks. Thank you very much, and thanks especially to CIC for co-hosting this event tonight. Very important subject, a very important time to be discussing women in diplomacy, as we so eloquently have heard from the ambassadors and from the diplomats on this panel. I'm not going to add too much more, because I think the report that we've done and the continuing work that we have done has focused on many of the barriers that we have already heard about. I mean, I would add just a few more to kind of I don't know, perhaps depress you or perhaps anger you. But there's, that we've heard about the glass ceilings, but there are also glass walls that keep women kind of bunched into particular sectors, so-called feminine sectors. There's the glass cliff, which I think is relevant, particularly as we talk about a woman as a Secretary General. Women are appointed to high leadership positions in organizations that are failing, and then they can be blamed. So there's a slight double-edged sword there about that. Then we've heard about these gendered perceptions and the stereotypes and biases that affect, that an ambassador is always draw an ambassador, you draw a man, right? This kind of, and our project is designed partly to counter that. And in fact, we have a podcast series with women in leadership positions in diplomacy, partly to say, what, there are lots of women out there doing this. Ambassadors are not just men. There's also sexual harassment and violence against women. And I think that in the context of the UN, we have heard some shocking stories about what can happen in multilateral contexts, when in multilateral conferences, where there's no accountability for harassment. Harassers go unpunished, right? So that's a serious issue that also can lead to women leaving the career before they've reached higher levels. We've also these inflexibilities in the workplace, long working hours. This tendency to have diplomatic receptions in the evenings, so you can't go pick up your kid. This kind of thing is another barrier. And then there is a barrier that I think has been alluded to, partially caused by the Vienna Diplomatic Convention in terms of defining what are the rights and responsibilities of those who follow with you, right? What that kind of benefits are there? And we've heard a lot about how it can be very difficult for trailing spouses to find work in a host country, because then that would depend on agreements, bilateral agreements between the host and the sending country. All of these things can constitute serious barriers. Those kind of challenges also, I think, are much greater for underrepresented groups. In any country, right? Diplomats are elites. Let's face it. You're the elite of the elite, and who are the elites in that particular country can then dominate. And so there are questions about access to diplomacy, that go beyond even just sort of women themselves. And as I think someone said, if diplomacy is about representing the country, then you're representing the whole country, right? And that means everyone in it, which obviously includes the half of the population that is female. And so our project is designed to try to come up with recommendations. We are now engaged in a process of listening to women diplomats in a variety of locations around the world, including New York, and then gathering their experiences, their lessons, the things the good practices that could be shared, and then we will produce a second report in the first quarter of 2026 that will embody some of those recommendations. But I think I'll turn to Marta, who will cover the next steps of the recommendations.
Yes, thank you so much, Marta. I'll briefly introduce Marta. Marta is the co-founder and manager of the Women in Diplomacy project at LSE Ideas, where she oversees the project's activities and strategic vision. Formerly, Marta led research and evaluation projects for the European Union, focusing on strengthening citizen engagement and inclusion in democratic processes and improving EU decision-making and funding mechanisms. Marta, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, NYU at CSC, for hosting us and organizing this important discussion. Thank you so much, Ambassador Lopez, Ambassador Haaren, and fellow panelists for your important interventions. I think on barriers, I don't have much to add, apart from maybe one element, and then maybe I'll move on to enablers besides just discussing barriers, because I think we need to change the beat of this discussion to something more positive potentially. But the only thing that really comes to mind that we also found through our research is kind of the everyday practices, and we talked about it a lot today, but it's also how the diplomatic day and conferences and gatherings are structured, when and where networking happens. Oftentimes it happens in the evenings when women have to tend to childcare responsibilities, how spaces are designed, are there spaces to be able to, for conferences, bring in children and attend to your children during the workday. But that's, I think, is really looking ahead, because so many things have to happen before that. But that's just one addition. And in terms of barriers, how we think about them is really in three groups: the structural, so the kind of social organizational context, the work-life balance, the recruitment that we all covered, the cultural, so perceptions, bias, and then individual. So from the imposter syndrome to kind of really kind of lack of confidence and self-perceptions that affect us all. But moving on to enablers, again, we've covered a lot of ground, but what we see in terms of existing enablers, but we still need to see more of is, we have individual champions and leaders like Ambassador Lopez and Ambassador Haaren who can bring that change in terms of mitigating and really preventing some of these barriers. We see a proliferation of networks, professional networks, regional networks that really do support women in exchanging knowledge and tools and best practices, and we see more and more of mentorship. But I think what we need to see more of in general is really kind of a structured approach to how those barriers are looked at and prevented. So here we're talking about supportive career development, both in terms of formal institutional support and informal forms of development. So formal institutional support, and again, I think I might be repeating some of these points, but it includes training and capacity building, and in doing so, making sure that everyone is aware of the benefits and the value of diversity in decision making. It's not just, talking at women what they already know, but really, really embedding these values of diversity. We have, rethinking recruitment practices. How is it done? Who's on the panel? Who's in the pipeline? And really thinking earlier on. We have flexible working and childcare support measures, which are incredibly important. And then in terms of informal forms of development, mentorship, role models, and support networks really become really, really important. And I think these three elements have actually been the most repeated. They're really the patterns and the trends that we see that really have a lot of impact. And as you can see, these are simple measures, but a lot of them are still missing. So yeah, I just wanted to shed some light on enablers before we move on to kind of discussing more structurally kind of the recommendations that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. This concept of enablers is incredibly important in this discussion. So I'd like to thank you all for sharing so openly about the challenges. And for our second round, let's shift to the solutions. What have you seen in practice, or are there any initiatives, whether within your own ministries at the UN or beyond, that have effectively promoted women's participation in diplomacy? What practical recommendations would you suggest for making real progress? I think this time let's switch up the order, and Sylvia, perhaps I can start with you.
Thank you. So regarding, in terms of best practices, we recently, maybe a year ago, we had a promotion examination in the Mexican Foreign Service that had an affirmative action component to it, which means there were more openings for women than there were for men, and the same actually for the incoming members of the Foreign Service. We had also more openings for women than for men in this incoming Foreign Service examination. We showed numbers for the last promotion examination that in the cases of when the ranking at the Foreign Service increased, there were less women. For example, there were 30% of women in the case of counselors, at the counselor level. And at the ministerial level, the minister, there were 18% of women in that rank. So the higher you went up, the lower the number of women within that rank. So there were some marginal results from the affirmative action promotion examination. There was a 10% increase in women in the minister rank. And in the counselor, the increase was 3%. So obviously the lower the rankings were, the more marginal the increase of women in that rank was. So that proved that there was it was something that was needed. And there was a little bit of backlash from some, particularly men who were competing for those positions. But it went through, and in general it was well received. So that is kind of a good practice that I can share, but there needs to be done, particularly what I mentioned regarding the actual, that it's in the paper, it's in the law the ability to have a child care support, but that's not being implemented. So that is, it's a positive that it's there, but the negative is that it's not being implemented, and the positive is that now we have more affirmative action so that women can be placed in the higher rankings of the Foreign Service. That would be what I could share for now in terms of best practices. Thank you.
Thank you. We can go over to Benedicta.
Thank you. In terms of the best practices, as I previously mentioned, that we have sort of like a transformation in our foreign industry, especially since 10 years ago. So what are the changes is that first, not only the structure of the foreign ministry, like for instance, we introduced sort of like a gender policy, gender sensitive policy in our foreign affairs, and also there are like women friendly policy, and for the first time we had nursery room, for instance, in the in our office, because it never happened before. We have nursery room, we have sort of like a room that is only for women if they bring their children, everything, so that we create an environment whereas a mother can also work from the office. But also we have, for the first time also, we have a network of women diplomats. And also I think the same with Ambassador Egriselda, I think mentioned earlier, the importance of the mentoring. We have sort of a mechanism of mentoring for the women diplomats, also in our foreign ministry now. But also we have now established, I think 5 years ago, we have a position, like very specific position in all missions and embassies for an officer responsible for reporting of sexual harassment, including in our mission here. I can say that I'm the officer, so everyone who, well, fortunately, no one came to me. I hope that's a good news. But we have this sort of like a focal point. If there anyone, not only women, but also men, if you feel sexually harassed, you can report it to me and I will treat it with full confidentiality. And then, speaking of the network, it's not only that we establish it within our foreign ministry, but also cross ministries. So we have this kind of like a, I think now in Jakarta we have biennial meeting. Every 2 months, we have the network of women civil servants. So they will gather in one place and then they will talk and so on. But also during the our former foreign minister, she also established a women network for women mediators in the Southeast Asia region. So because we know the like I mentioned earlier, the perception that diplomacy is a men's role, or in particular peace process, everything that's related to security is men's role. We think that we need to break it so that we have this network not only in our national level, at the national level, but also at the regional level. And we also joined some of the other networks of, at the time, women foreign ministers that usually convene a meeting every year at the UN during the high level week. So I think those are some of the best practices that I can also share from our side.
Thank you. On to you, Blanca.
Thank you so much. So I will be speaking about what the organs can do. here we have heard from ministries, gender parity, enhancement of the work conditions of women. One thing that I would like to hear is where are the men in this effort, but we can get to that later. But in terms of the organs, I mean, my experience in OPGA 79 has been to continue the practice of previous PGAs of setting up an advisory board on gender equality with the ability to define the discourse. In this case, the focus was women's economic empowerment, being an area that was fairly uncontroversial. In past presidencies, Ambassador Lopez has been a continued member of this board as a gender champion. There's been also, in addition to policy focuses, a focus on a lactation room being open in the headquarters, which actually is not the responsibility necessarily of member states, but rather the Secretariat. But kudos to that Gender Advisory Board to having put the pressure on the Secretariat to open a lactation room, which should have existed decades ago. This is one of the initiatives. It also fed the PGA with good advocacy and good messaging from the 17 members that were members this year in terms of these speeches, identifying where are the moments, the strategic moments where the PGA as a man of a certain generation can bring to the discussion the angle of where are the women, what should women be doing in certain settings, and demanding the presence of women. And that's a nice segue to an initiative that happened this 69th Commission on the Status of Women, which was to seat the chair, to seat the time. The PGA gave part of its time to a young woman, civil society representative from Cameroon. The same happened with the chair, and the same happened with the president of ECOSOC. So it was truly an example of saying, I should not be speaking here, but I'd rather hear from you. I thought it was a good visual shock to the Commission, particularly at the time where all the representatives in the opening segment would have been men otherwise. In revitalization, indeed, the new language for revitalization, actually the last effort that happened in the Security Council to do the same with the provisional rules of procedure of the Security Council was stalled using the example of revitalization that was stalled in the past, so now there's no excuse. I think it will come to the Council as well. And then finally there was an initiative, a parliamentary dialogue. Past presidents have had morning dialogues that were foreseen in revitalization resolutions to have discussions on different topics. And one of the topics was used to commemorate the International Day of Women in Diplomacy and link women diplomats here to women mediators on the field. So basically understanding that women diplomats here and peacemakers in South Sudan, in Colombia, in Myanmar are equally important, and that the connection between the sort of invisible mentoring of one and the other, and the possibility that women diplomats here may be amplifying the message of women peacemakers in the field, was for us a key way of celebrating International Day of Women in Diplomacy. And all of this was embraced by a man, and we thought that's important. I mean, this room just shows the fact that we're discussing women in diplomacy, and we're all convinced about it, but except for certain champions that are here with us, they still don't see how they can project themselves in women as leaders, and how can they project themselves as women diplomats representing them in different scenarios, as Benedicta was speaking about. Second, I would just share my experience from the Council. As you know, the Council passed in the year 2000 the Resolution 1325, which actually tried to change that perception of women victims, women needing support, women not participating in their future and their destiny, into women actors, women peacemakers, women mediators, women politicians, women diplomats. So that effort in the Council culminated then in 2242, Resolution 2242, that actually pushed for women civil society representatives to come to the Council. And you can see from 2015 to now that the increase has been exponential, and most civil society representatives tend to be women. So I think that these are efforts that are very valuable in changing those perceptions that Sylvia and Benedicta were referring to, that indeed women don't play a role in diplomacy, they don't belong to the hallways of the United Nations. And I would just finally add one aspect that is objectivizing that issue of perception, and it's measuring as many things as we can measure. Participation of women in council meetings or in GA meetings, panels of experts. This is some of the data that we developed in the council. How many women experts are participating in the sanctions panels? How many women ambassadors are PRs, DPRs? How many women are speaking at the council under Rule 39? So these kinds of things are very powerful for then creating a counter discourse. It's like if we are at 20%, it's unacceptable. We cannot continue to be more than 50% of the population and not being represented in the halls of power. The only way to have an inclusive future, a future that represents us all and that ensures that the solutions of the future are brought by everybody that is in the communities, by ensuring that women are at least at the 50% in these meetings. So thank you.
Now for academic experts, what have you found in your research when it comes to solutions, and what can we do to accelerate change?
Thanks so much. I will just outline very briefly in the interest of time the recommendations we already put forward in our first report. So if you're curious about more information, do have a look at the report, and we can disseminate a link after the event as well. But we have 7 fairly, again, simple recommendations, but a lot of them we find are just not present in ministries of foreign affairs as well as international organizations. So really we start with creating and implementing a plan to enhance gender equality, and here is where we need to see senior leadership committed to gender equality and having a plan and strategy to see it through. Oftentimes we see commitment in terms of external action, so we have women, peace and security agenda, or we have feminist foreign policies, but we see that internal institutional actions really lag behind in terms of looking inward and seeing what the situation is in terms of women's representation. And to create such a plan, we need also to understand what the situation is, and as Blanca said, majority of organizations do not gather the right data. The best kind of databases that we have, for example, from University of Gothenburg Gender or Security Index, has a lot of missing data in terms of Ministry of Foreign Affairs data across the ranks. The best data we have on is on ambassadorships. So we really need to gather gender disaggregated data. We really need to understand what the situation is, also in terms of intersectionality, in terms of experiences, progression, and the speed of that progression. I would love to also measure exactly how long women tend to speak on average, or the number of interruptions women get in negotiations and in public fora. The third one is what I've already mentioned, which is aligning both internal and external gender equality efforts. So not just having this external flashy plan, but really looking inward. 4 is making sure recruitment processes are fair. And it's not just looking at where we are now, but really planning ahead of how we can make diplomacy in the pipeline inclusive but also accessible, because we still don't see many social groups represented in society, in diplomacy. 5 talks about really implementing formal and informal career development, which I talked about in terms of enablers. So I won't go into much detail, but it really varies from mentoring schemes, networks, training, capacity building, and the like. 6 is rethinking building design and making facilities inclusive and accessible, really rethinking accessible bathrooms, childcare facilities, designing agenda and networking, when and how everything happens, really rethinking the day, the conferences, the gatherings, and how diplomacy is done. And finally, something I also mentioned is making social inclusion and gender equality non-negotiable, but making its benefits known to everyone in the organization, and shedding, really underlining the collective benefits of inclusion and diversity, including how it sheds lights on issues that wouldn't have been otherwise included, how it aids mutual understanding, enhances social understanding and dynamics, fosters inclusive culture, and really strengthens policy making and makes policies durable, long-term, and better. So this is our 7 recommendations that we have outlined, and we're now working on the 2nd edition of the report, and Haaren will speak about some of the recommendations we're looking at now.
Thanks very much. So some of the ideas that are coming out through our conversations that we've been engaged in thus far go a little bit further than these recommendations that we originally made. Some quite some obvious ones are, ensuring provision of childcare, but one is enabling couples to serve abroad together, which is about those bilateral agreements. Why can't we have reciprocity worldwide so that there is just an understanding that every single country allows the trailing partner of a diplomat to work inside that country? That might require international negotiations, which at this point in time might seem a moonshot. But it is an obvious structural issue. Others are rethinking the diplomatic working day. So we have talked to some ambassadors who have actually, given the power that they have decided that in fact we will not be doing evening reception. We will be doing lunches, right? And so that we're not going to have 16-hour days. We're going to have normal working days and fit diplomacy within those hours. We've also heard suggestions on how one might build flexibility into a diplomatic career, which might envisage having to move every 3 years or whatever the norm is in a particular diplomatic service, to allow an on-off ramp. An off-ramp so that if you do have young children, you could work in another ministry within the government in capital for, 7 years or so, and then resume your diplomatic career at the appropriate level so that you have not lost out in seniority by taking a bit off ramp, but you've gained experience somewhere else in the administration, but then you rejoin the diplomatic career, and at a point of your family life in which you could resume, say, those external postings. Another is making training on gender and unconscious bias mandatory at various points of the career for everyone inside the organization. And then finally, one is, we've talked a lot about networks, but one is, what do networks do and how do they feed into the organization? That is, that networks should be within ministries, within the United Nations, should actually have the power, should be listened to. In other words, the management, the human resources or whatever, are listening to networks, so that there's a representation role also of networks, and not just a kind of a support role of networks. So those are just some of the ideas that are coming out of these conversations that we've been having in various cities around the world, and that we will put into the next version of the report due out sometime in the first quarter of 2026. Thank you.
Thank you to all our panelists for these very rich insights. I would encourage everyone to read the report of our colleagues, which I think we will circulate a link to after the event. We are meant to have a little bit of time for Q&A now. We're running short on time, so I think we can do very short round, 1 to 2 questions, and my colleague Leah will come around with a microphone. So I see 2 hands. Could you please introduce yourself and then go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Damilola. I'm a journalist here at Focus Blue. I have 2 questions, and the panelists can answer. On affirmative actions, what can be done to make sure that when a government that's not a gender enthusiast is elected, what can be done to ensure that they don't roll back on progress that's been made by previous governments? And also, still on affirmative actions, we've had instances where when women are elected into offices through affirmative actions, that position then gains derogatory description. An example, there was a time in Kenya where women who were elected into the legislative arms were then called the president's girls. The men weren't called the president's boys. Currently, there's a conversation going on in Nigeria about creating affirmative position for women to get into legislative, but people are saying it's going to create some sort of ceiling where it's only those new seats that women can occupy. What about the other 400 and something seats that already exist? Now women can get into those positions except, well, like 50 new ones that's now been created. And I have one question for Ambassador Pedro, if that's okay, if I can direct a question to her as well.
For the ambassador?
Yes.
I'm not sure if we'll have time, but maybe you could say it, and then if there's time.
Okay, yes, because she talked briefly about the recent resolution, the GA, on the revitalization. I just wanted to ask what were some of the concessions that both co-host country or member state had to make on gender matters. She mentioned that there were a couple of progress, but also I looked at, I read the resolution, and I saw that even though there's some sort of progress in terms of like language, does it guarantee that next Secretary General will be a woman?
And could you pass the mic to your colleague there, and then we'll go back to the panel.
Thank you. I wanted to thank everyone, and my question is for Ms. Montejo and Ms. Ambassador Lopez. I'm curious about the structures, how the structure is hyper-masculine in United Nations. I come from a bilateral career and now moved to United Nations, and I'm terrified about the long working hours. I'm from the 5th committee, and I'm already having nightmares about how Ms. Ambassador Lopez slept basically at the United Nations for many days. And I'm sure, also I know from my colleague, Ms. Mendoza, you cannot imagine the workload she has every day, and I don't know how you can deal with it at the same time having kids. I have a young kid. So it's really, I'm curious to see how we can change that hyper-masculine structure, because it's the only way. We have done everything to try to increase the number of women, but I find this is the way we can really push for change. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, let's kick it back to the panel. Is there anyone who'd like to have the first go?
First go with the affirmative action stuff, and also the hypermasculine, which I think it's really cool. But anyway, so on the affirmative action, it's a tough question because you're right that there will be some kind of discriminatory, additional discriminatory issues that you may have when you prefer women over men in certain positions. I don't really know the answer to how we can change that, honestly. But in Mexico we have a female president of the Congress in both chambers and the Chamber of Deputies right now, and a lot of now we have parity in both houses of Congress. So it's positive, and in terms of affirmative action, kind of there were directives for political parties to post women as candidates. And currently we don't have that issue where, of course, the government is led by a woman, right? The head of state, we have our first woman head of state. So, and as she likes to say, she didn't get there by herself. Everybody, all the women are there behind her. So anyway, I mean, our country, I guess it's different in terms of some African countries you mentioned, but hopefully it's just a kind of a education kind of change of culture and how you see things, and progress. I think we can all get there if we try, and that's the best way I can answer. And on the hypermasculinity structure, I think we all need to fight for that. When I first got to the UN 2016, my kid was 1, so you can tell how long I've been here too long, right? I'm leaving, so don't worry. So he was 1 year old. And what resolution did I get when I got here? QCPR. I left the UN, and this is before liquidity crisis, anything of that sort. So, but the Fifth Committee is even different. So we have to work on that together. And I think Ambassador Egriselda was there as a chair, and so we need to continue the work. As we cannot be working all day and all night. And I think it's been mentioned here also. I think, again, in solidarity, we need to try and change that culture. And we can, now we have a pretty big excuse, which is the liquidity crisis, so let's use it. Because I left the UN twice in 2016 at 6 a.m. It was a walk of shame from work, and it was not nice. It was very bad for my mental health and really bad for my relationship with my 1-year-old. So let's avoid it.
Very quickly answer to the first question about the affirmative action. I think there will be no quick fix. If there are like any changes or anything that we cannot really like guarantee whether it cannot be turned back into another action that might prevent us to have a more women's voice in the country. But I think I'm a believer that root causes needs to be addressed first. And as Sylvia earlier also mentioned about the education, that's the importance of the education first. And because the first thing that we need to address also the social structure on how the perspective, really I'm going back again to perspective. So if we are able to address how people think about women, how people can think about the place that women and men are actually equal in the society, then whatever it is that happened in the country wouldn't be able to change the social reality, the social structure. There are some instances I know that perhaps there are in some countries that have like a turning points, but I think we still need to be able to change it by addressing or by continuing having this affirmative action through their education process, and also through the narratives. What kind of the narrative that we want the society to accept? What kind of narrative that we think that it will make the society can appreciate women as equal as men? But again, there will be no quick fix. There will be no one-size-fits-all approach for any countries. But I do believe that the structural causes, that's the one that we need to address and needs to be addressed. So that's from me.
Thank you for the questions. I mean, I would add the reactions to affirmative action, I don't think that they're that horrible. We can live with that. What I find most pernicious is when the reaction is, and when are we advancing men, or do we need to protect men? Which is happening before there is any advancement of women's empowerment. And so I do think that while we address the root causes, while we address the issues of education and ensuring that men and women are given a fair chance, I think that the quotas and affirmative action are absolutely necessary. There is no social change until there is a visual effect in the room where you see 50-50 and you live with that 50-50 and feel okay. Because part of it has to do with fear, part of it has to do with biases, part of it has to do with the unknown. You know, women have not entered the halls of power for so many decades. We are new to those places. We continue to enter a room full of men, and we don't think it's a man's issue, whereas if a man enters a room full of women, they say, where's the OBGYN? Sorry. That's the kind of thinking. It must be a women's issue if all the participants are women. Whereas men have to start becoming more comfortable with that reality, in the same way that you feel more comfortable with other types of reality. And on the hyper-masculinity, I would on our male, good progressive male colleagues that are also assuming, like your husband, like many other husbands, that are assuming I'm wanting to take care of the kids, and that they also raise those issues as responsible parents, because it's equally on them to take care and ensure that future generations are good citizens, are people that contribute to the world, to an equal world that we would like to see. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in the interest of time, we'll have to close the panel because we're much delayed. And please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists. Thank you for your honesty, your insight, your information. Tonight we moved from identifying barriers to surfacing solutions, and that's exactly the kind of conversation that will help us push forward. So, in conclusion, it's now my pleasure to invite Ms. Betty Wainaina, Program Director for the NYU Center on International Cooperation's Multilateral Reform Program, to deliver our closing remarks. Betty is a social development specialist with over 18 years of diverse experience in the development sector. Betty, please close us out.
Thanks, Natalie. Today's conversation has been very inspiring for me. And this is for various reasons. One is because I could relate to every story that was told. So reflecting on my own career and looking back at my journey as well, everything you said, Ambassador Lopez, and what Ambassador Van Haaren also said, spoke to me. And I'll start with a little story even as I close. I worked for a cabinet secretary who was female. And in 3 years, we won 13 awards because of the innovation that we brought to the ministry. And the UK government heard about this and sent a delegation to come and meet, the minister and her team. And when they came in, one of the delegates who'd come with their minister sort of reached out to me and asked me, "Is it a man or a woman?" And I said, "It's a woman." And he said, "Shocking. With all these results, she leads like a man." And so I looked at him and thought, what do you mean she leads like a man? Are women not supposed to succeed? And I realized this unconscious bias is so entrenched that even people who think they're progressive don't realize just how biased they are in their day-to-day communication and in the way they think about these things. So as I was reflecting on really even some of the messages that I saw in the report, which I found very interesting, one of the things that I think sticks a lot is really the pipeline matters. And that pipeline is dominated by male bias, and we've seen that over and over again. And I listened to my sister from Past Blue and Chapel because I remember conversations around what we call the Women Member of Parliament in Kenya, from Kenya. So this is something I championed as in my career. You realize that usually women, and this, especially political positions and political ascension, is not only about merit. So it's not like it's the most meritorious men who make it to the top. A lot of this has to do with behind-the-scenes deal-making. And those behind-the-scenes deal-making are deals made with men because men are not in those spaces. So women continue to be disadvantaged. It's not that they're not the best, it's not that they cannot make it, but when the deal is being made, they're not there. It's so much so that women who then really distinguish themselves and fight to the table are negotiated out. So you'll find a very strong woman is told, we'll give you another position. Just let this person take over because this person is very important for us. They're very strategic in this. They either represent this community or they're the ones who are bringing the most funding, and we'll definitely give you a very good position. So women are negotiated out of positions which they had actually competed for and they could make it. The other thing is, I listened to the glass walls and I listened with keen interest. I've not had that terminology in the past, so it fascinated me. because it represents something very interesting. And I was reflecting on just what is going on now in the context of the SG's UN 80 Reform Initiative. So based on the report, where women are most represented, if you listen to the sort of rumors that are going around on which agencies are likely to be merged, which agencies are duplicating, which need to be rationalized, you realize it's those agencies that have majority of women. And so we'll have a situation coming up where actually women are being disadvantaged, not because they were not the ones that were doing the best work and were not doing the best. It's because suddenly they are in those spaces which you could easily dismiss. And that links as well to the glass cliff. That usually women are being given those dockets which, when we are doing any rationalization, when we decide actually what this ministry is too bloated, how do we think differently about it? What we end up doing is that we push out those positions and those dockets that we didn't think were important in the first place, and that's where women are. So over and over again, this is so systemic, it's so entrenched, that sometimes I wonder, even just the things we are talking about still don't address just the nitty-gritties of why we're in this situation. It still sort of falls short of helping us address the challenges that we're facing. I completely agree with mentorship and holding the other woman's hand. So holding another woman up. And I think that is one of the powerful lessons that I've seen, that women who have succeeded usually have said another woman held them up, another woman opened the door, another woman spoke their name at the table and recommended them. It's usually never the other way around. So as this conversation advances, I'm really, really grateful to Ambassador Lopez and Ambassador Haaren, because you have given us the real life story of this thing. And to listen to you, Sylvia and Benedicta and Blanca, your real life experiences, and told with such humor. But evidently, those situations are never always easy, but you've said it with a lot of humanity and humor that brings everything home. We are really grateful to you and to sharing your stories. And to Karen and Marta, thanks for sharing your work and bringing this conversation here. As CIC, we feel privileged that we could amplify this conversation and amplify these issues, because really international relations and international cooperation is not just about governments, it's about people to people. And those people are not just men, those people are women and men. So it's a shame that we'd have an institution like the UN, which is the epitome and the center of multilateralism, that is the center and is the sort of best practice and originator of norms and standards, never having a woman at the helm, up to this point, 80 years later. And we hope that with this amplification of these issues and bringing this conversation here, that it will actually sort of give impetus to the movement that is building up. We are all looking forward to a Madam Secretary in 2026. And we hope that each one of us here will take the message back. And wherever we are in the networks that we are in, that we'll take that message back, that people are men and women, not just men. So women cannot be represented by men. They can be represented by women as well. So thank you very much.